Hello and welcome to episode 393 of the Crate and Crowbar, a gaming podcast being recorded on the 24th of February 2022, mere hours before the games we are about to talk about are made wholly irrelevant by the release of Elden Ring, the biggest game of the year we haven't played. I'm Marsh Davis. I'm joined this evening by Chris Thurston.
Thank you very much.
What's the game you want to pointlessly talk about, even though no one will care?
The game I will go back to playing for a couple of hours when we finish recording this, before inevitably riding a horse for a bit. I don't know what I'll be doing after that in Elden Ring. Is Destiny 2. I thought I would get this out of the way because I feel like the moment I said those words, a little timer started somewhere in Marsh's brain, and possibly in the brains of any of the people listening. But I feel like this is my annual opportunity to speak out loud about my thoughts and feelings about the only game I really play, let's be honest, apart from the scant hour here or there that I managed to invest in something else every now and then. Obviously, I believe that will change for a new From Software game, but Destiny got its first big expansion in about 18 months this week, and it's very, very good. And I think I can talk about the ways in which it's very, very good in ways that hopefully are... I was thinking about this before deciding what to say about the game. And what is really interesting about it is I think they have made a ton of changes which will be abstractly interesting, or at least sort of speak to an interesting direction or greater wisdom about the kind of game they're making and why. I have no idea whether this is... means that this is a good time to play Destiny, or if it necessarily comes to this sort of recommendation.
Could you jump on at this point?
You can, and well, I mean, maybe that's the position to start from. Destiny has really gone from strength to strength in the last couple of years in many ways, except as an experience for new players where it is failing quite badly. And that is a real shame. Some of that was introduced by the need that they encountered to, they call it vaulting, but basically just remove massive chunks of the game. Because for tech reasons, engine reasons, and download size limitation reasons, they simply couldn't maintain the amount of content that they anticipated the game kind of growing to become over the course of multiple expansions. This is Destiny 2 specific. So they, full on removed the original campaign for the game, which just cannot be played anymore. And as of this latest expansion, they have removed now the first 3 expansions that the game got, including, as of this week, the expansion Forsaken, which was extremely well received. So they've removed basically half of it, but the single player half essentially. And what this means is it is a extremely disjointed experience to come into for new players. Notoriously bad, because while there is like when they did this initial change, they did introduce a new player experience. It's not great. It's not massively compelling, and also at the end of it, there's a point where they kind of have to just give up and dump you into the game and say like, "Well, good luck." And then after that, they have managed to fuck this up in ways that are funny, but not necessarily great. So, for example, over Christmas, it was Bungie's 30th anniversary as a company, and there was a little update, like a mini expansion, pretty small, but kind of a fun kind of thing where, They did a very good job of bringing some Halo weapons into Destiny while making it very obvious that's what they were doing, but dancing around the fact that they don't have the IP in a way that was very elegant, like using old Halo 2 slang, like the 3-letter acronyms of the Halo 2 multiplayer community that crucially aren't in-game, but are things that the players said to each other as the names for guns in Destiny. So it's like kind of just cute stuff like that. But as part of that, they introduced a new kind of like arena firefight type horde mode called Dares of Eternity, where it's a game show hosted by a wretched sort of space ghost goblin man and his master, a celestial horse.
Of course.
And this is I mean this is several months old in Destiny standards, so I get to the new stuff, but this is good for several reasons. One is they introduced this enigmatic star horse kind of thing just in the kind of background of a scene several quite serious expansions ago, and it's very abundantly clear they had no idea what it was. It was just one of these rule of cool Destiny enigmas. And with that, and as they're doing so much work to round up loose ends in the plot and tie this whole thing together and move the narrative forward in a way that I find genuinely great, I sort of love that with this expansion they decided to simply give up on that. And so, what was the significance of the Celestial Horse? Well, its name is Star Horse and it hosts a game show. Why? Fuck you. But the reason I was getting onto this is when they launched this little mini expansion. As a little conceit, the next time you loaded the game after this had come out, you were pulled into the Dares of Eternity, down into a black hole and down into this game show to play it for the first time, and that kind of unlocked it for you, and so on and so on. Now, the mistake they made is it was a level 1150 activity, but whatever flag on their end signifies, hey, if you haven't played this, you get dropped into this, was also being overridden for completely new players as well. So
Oh,
someone loading the game for the first time, who you now start, or at that time you started at 1100 power, was being, rather than getting the, I think this is exactly what happened, rather than getting the intended new player experience, was being kidnapped by a space horse and forced into a game show they couldn't hope to complete. Like, it's supposed to be a 10-minute activity, but it was taking people an hour and a half to grind through this thing they were desperately underleveled for. And then this led to a event where your level in Destiny is basically like an average of the power level of the equipment you're wearing. So if you put on worse gear, you can de-level yourself, right? Like, if that makes sense. So
hmm.
what people started doing was putting on their worst gear to go into that mode so that they could get match made, because you get match made with people at the same level, to get match made with new players, at which point they would put their good gear back on and rescue the new players. And it
Oh.
turned into this big kind of community rescue effort, which was genuinely heartening. And Bungie ended up fixing it and then giving everyone who did that a little special in-game emblem as a thank you for rescuing. Probably, I mean, I imagine, you think a lot about DAO numbers and sort of churn rates of player acquisition, particularly in free-to-play games. And you've got to imagine that someone was looking at a graph for that month and it's like, why wasn't the game very sticky for this whole cohort of new players? We had loads of marketing out at the time for this new anniversary update. Why did everyone bounce? And it's because you imprisoned them in an unwinnable mode that didn't make any fucking sense.
I don't understand. How does that error get past people, though? I
I
mean,
don't I don't know.
that's-
It's there's a I think there's always this slight sense, and I love this game a lot, but there's always a slight sense that it's a runaway train at times that can't
Hmm.
be totally controlled, and occasionally it's just going to do things. There's a gun in Destiny that has broken the game now so many times. It's a rifle called Telesto, and there is a website called Days Since Telesto Last Broke the Game, because it's coded in a particular. It's a rare weapon that creates these little kind of like bomblets when you fire it, and people have discovered everything from being able to farm the bomblets themselves for points and experience to the game crashing entire servers when that gun is fired sideways on a Tuesday. Like, it's this, it's there's a lot of heart in this, but also a lot of, like, I feel tremendous sympathy for the people like having to debug half of this stuff. But actually, a lot of that was the reason. Another one of the reasons for all that vaulting. It's a long run up to the new stuff, but basically, the last expansion before this one, Beyond Light, was originally planned to be Destiny 3, and so what we now see as like the removal of content was really originally supposed to be just the kind of what happened to Destiny 1, like the kind of obsolescence over time of the previous game. And when they decided
Right.
to just keep expanding Destiny 2, it put them in the awkward position of having to kind of half do that, which
Hmm.
is actually retains more content than you would otherwise have, but from the community's perspective, looks like having things taken away, right?
Yeah.
Which is just a weird problem to have. And also it meant that I think it took away the pressure they might have felt to have the story progress in a way that could continually bring new players in. which is what they haven't done. Where I say that Destiny's been great in the last couple of years is primarily because they have really found their voice with it and found a way of telling stories through the 4 seasons that happen in every year, i.e. the kind of seasons of new content. They're genuinely compelling, and they brought on a lot of new writers because Destiny's had so many different styles of storytelling in its life, particularly Destiny 2, which kind of started life as a kind of huge overcompensation for the severe tone of the original game, and kind of went full on sort of in many places like sort of I guess like Marvel madcap kind of Bantageddon, in a way that wore extremely thin quite quickly. And then it sort of struggled with that for a while, and then they brought in a load of new writers, and I think I get the impression it elevated some of the people who'd done some of the great stuff on the original game, and on the great stuff that did exist in Destiny 2, and they found a much better balance for it and have been much better at foregrounding things that were previously buried in lore text, bringing in characters and giving characters meaningful journeys and relationships with each other. And it's been a big success for the game. I think it's next to Final Fantasy XIV, the game I see people talk about the most in terms of enjoying that kind of ongoing sci-fi soap opera of a serialized narrative.
From the outside, it's almost impossible to get a sense of how that stuff works. Like it seems so large, so maximalist, and so a lot like Halo is. It's kind of chained to the idea of having to reinvent greater scale threats every iteration. I just don't know really what it means once you get past a certain level of sort of existentialism. It's just different levels of Space Dad Ghost returning from the grave, or indeed Star Horses.
It's funny because it is that to an extent, but what I feel like, having also played Halo Infinite recently, I feel like Halo suffers far more for that, where it's like. And I think it's my wank answer for this would be that I feel like it's not necessarily, hard sci-fi by any means, but there is an underlying sense of like thematic purpose to a lot of the things that are in Destiny. Not the horse, but everything else. It's not sort of... there is a meditative quality to it, and I think a genuine interest in imbuing. A lot of things were kind of thrown at the wall in early Destiny, and then there was a second pass, which I think is often when a lot of the good stuff happens, where someone went through and kind of found ways to imbue a lot of those artifacts, I suppose, with a degree of not just meaning in the context of the story or ever greater kind of degrees of existential peril, but with a kind of a meaningful kind of philosophy behind the game. I'm stood on the precipice of getting too into it necessarily, but what I found with Halo is Halo didn't have big ideas beyond the large hoop, kill everything, and would constantly return to that.
Would you be able to give like a sort of actual example of something like a narrative thing within the game that you thought was cool?
Well, okay, so there's a lot of... so the game is called Destiny, right? And they'll start with first principles. But one of the things that it kind of determined over time, and this is one of the things coded into its kind of core backstory now, but probably not intended when it started out, is its framing of this war between light and darkness, which is very sort of fantasy tropey. In Destiny, that is effectively 2 perspectives on the potential outcomes of the game of life, as in the specific theorem, the game of life. And it kind of posits that, this notion of life beginning... I'm going to butcher this slightly, but the inevitability of kind of survival necessitating that life ultimately take a kind of a final and relatively lethal shape, basically, and the kind of force of good in the game, which has been emerging over time and complicated in many different ways, is effectively what does it take for... is that kind of lethal final shape inevitable, or is it possible for a stable altruism to exist in life in the universe, basically? And can that ever be these players who kill things for guns all the time? Really, I mean, and the game will make fun of that sometimes, like that sort of you and your kind of player cohort as a chaotic element in all of this that effectively part of an experiment, not an experiment necessarily, but another roll of the dice by kind of cosmic forces effectively having a debate about what the inevitable nature of life is. And that is what the destiny of the title refers to, really.
Oh, right.
Like, what is that final shape of life? And that is, and then the story of the game, as it's kind of explored by the characters in it, is about sort of, particularly more recently, is about kind of coming to delineate those values from in this case, the huge orb that otherwise sort of monolithically represents one of them. And, kind of... and then there's just a lot of wizards that people want to see kiss. And you combine those two ideas, you got yourself a hit. So yeah, and like I don't know if that makes a case for it at all.
Yeah, you sold an idea from within Destiny to me. That does
Cool.
sound cool.
Yeah, like I mean, we'll go there, but like, it's, I think that sort of, it doesn't have to have something sophisticated to say all the time necessarily, but I feel like it really helps the story to retain its coherence and to be able to escalate in different ways along different axes when there's sort of a tangle of ideas at its center, basically. Right. Yeah. And I think it has, because I can understand from the outside that perspective of Destiny, continually needing to find bigger space dads to throw at you. It's a space auntie this time, I will say. But actually, I feel like that hasn't necessarily been true for the last couple of years, where, there are bigger or stranger things to contend with, but really what's kind of, and this maybe does bring me to the new one, like, is it's about contending with, really the new one is not necessarily about contending with the biggest threat you've ever faced. It's about contending with a re-articulation of the core tenet of the setting that fucks up everything you think you know about it, basically. And so, and then there's still monsters to fight. But so the premise of if people, I don't want to spoil the campaign. I finished it today actually, and it's great, and I'll talk about some of the reasons why. But I won't give any spoilers in this because I appreciate it's all very early doors. But long-term listeners to the podcast will know that I once broke down I think it was Alex and I broke down the 3 Destiny storylines that exist. A skeleton knows what you've done and is coming to tell your dad about it. Oh shit, I've left the time machine on, and Granddad still got it, being the 3 stories. And that only the best Destiny expansions or updates touch on more than one of them. And I think we identified that the best expansion at the time, the one that's most recently been vaulted, Forsaken, was pretty good because it did all 3. I'm happy to say that Destiny, the Witch Queen, also does all 3. Wow. Thus, objectively putting it on the upper echelons of Destiny storytelling. A skeleton definitely knows what you've done. Someone has left the time machine on, and also Granddad, he's got it.
Wow.
Yeah, so
in the bullseye of that weird fucking Venn diagram.
Exactly. It's just a big orb hanging in the sky, that Venn diagram. But the reason, there's, but the specific reason, so the premise of the new one is, it follows really closely on for the events of the previous season, which has now been kind of retired because it is over. So there's kind of a weirdness there, but effectively, a kind of space witch skeleton moth woman has rematerialized in our realm, and she and her followers now have the power of the light, the power of the traveler, the same power players have always had. And this has never happened before. It's never been the case that any of the enemy factions have always been defined by effectively not having access to the same powers that you do. And now they do. And this means effectively effectively gives you a new kind of class of superpowered enemies to fight that you have to destroy their ghosts afterwards, or else they respawn because they are like you in every way.
Oh.
That you can overhear their patrol chatter, and there's some jokes at that expense that basically they're just having the same experience you are. Even little cute things like when they use their supers, it shows up in the kill feed in exactly as it would in PvP.
Oh, wow.
Just little
That's
neat,
cute.
yeah, it's cute. It's cute. It's not like earth shattering, but it's cute. It does. Ultimately, though, it's not much more than like a cool new enemy type. But the campaign itself is about kind of investigating how this could possibly have happened. And to do this, you travel to the throne world of this particular character, the Witch Queen Savathun. A throne world being now an old Destiny concept, but a completely batshit thing from the outside, being a kind of like sort of mind, like a kind of physically actualized mind palace that can be accessed via spaceship if you know where you're going. Because Destiny's cosmos is sort of layered causal realities with where the willpower of certain beings can just create a horse, for example. I mean, I should explain the horse is either the servant or the master of all of the planets of the solar system, where the planets of the solar system have a consciousness that is based on the mechanism of each of their, like the interaction of each of their gravitational fields,
Oh,
where
Jesus.
their intersection creates a sort of vibration that could ultimately become self-aware, basically. Um,
And the
and
natural
so
shape of that would be a
it'd be a
horse, of
horse,
course.
yeah. Of course, of course. Anyway, so you go to this, but the throne world, as it previously throne worlds in Destiny, were kind of like wibbly sort of alternate dimensions that you dived into in particular boss fights to kill skeletons. In this, it's kind of slightly reimagined as effectively Bungie's always kind of spectacular environment art team, just like basically writing a long love letter to From Software, effectively. Um,
Oh, wow.
it is just a Dark Soul. It's just a beautiful Dark Souls that they've made. So it's a sort of swampy environment at first, like densely overground alien swamp under a kind of glowering green sky, crisscrossed with like almost like gossamer or spider silk kind of like nebula. It's very kind of strange looking. Got lots of strange objects in the sky because it's a Bungie game. And then at the center of this, um, a gleaming kind of gleaming white and blue marble fortress, which represents the kind of the fact that these characters now have the light, where made of kind of almost like bone-like marble or like ossified marble that glows internally in this slightly dreamlike way, draped in like red and purple flowers and vegetation, and it's just beautiful. It's like a kind of it's somewhere between Anor Londo and I'm trying to think of I guess a kind of like an alien Anor Londo is a way to describe it. It's really gorgeous, and it kind of and the kinds of puzzles and things that they've embedded in it and kind of woven through it are also very Dark Soulsy. There's a huge bell at one point.
Oh, yeah.
So
Well, there you go.
yeah, and it doesn't feel like it's not sort of when I say it's Dark Souls. I mean, it really feels like that's an environment team that knows what they're doing, but it really feels like a kind of a love letter, to that kind of. Destiny's had big fantasy and gothic elements before, but it's a good one. And one of the reasons that the campaign is cool, actually, to kind of continue that thread, is it feels it's one is probably the most substantial campaign they've done for a while. But also crucially, they made some decisions about the structure of the campaign that I really, really like. And one of them is when you begin it, has quite kind of like a kind of dramatic opening, and then you pick a difficulty level, which previously difficulties are things that you sort of level up in order to get access to in Destiny, right? Like the difficulty is just raising the power level of the activity. So you have to go do some grinding or something to get the higher difficulty in order to get the better rewards, to get the higher difficulty to get the better rewards. In this case, you can pick normal or legendary difficulty, and even on legendary difficulty, there is your power is locked to a certain level. So as long as you've reached that level, you will be. There's no point going higher than it. And that means that what you have in those missions is organic difficulty. It's difficulty that doesn't arise from your relative power with the things you're
Oh.
fighting. It's you're
Hmm.
locked in a particular place. And there are modifiers on it and things like that. And it really feels, for the first time in a long time with the Destiny campaign, like playing like a heroic Halo campaign or something like that,
Oh.
where your investment in the game is rewarded in terms of having a wider pool of weapons to draw from, and that makes quite a big difference. But it's not basically it's not the problem they previously had that comes from being an RPG where it's this is hard, but it's sort of stupid for me to persevere at getting better at the game. I might as well just go get better gear, right? Because that will then
Right.
make the game easy. It's hard on its own purpose, and beating the game on that difficulty basically lets you skip a huge amount of the kind of level grind that would otherwise follow it. They just give you a full set of high level gear at the end, just as a kind of you've put the time in, so you've done this with skill rather than time, which is just a really nice thing. And also, I think it frees them up to um, balance encounters and kind of build an experience around that campaign that's a bit more traditionally like a single player shooter. The other thing that's cool about it is they have obviously made a proactive effort to bring in a lot of very Destiny mechanics, but that never traditionally appear in the mainline campaigns. So Destiny's famous for this, but having really strong puzzle elements in its end game content, like particularly in raids, and then eventually they trickled out from raids to what are called dungeons, which are basically just 3-player raids, and then they trickled out from dungeons into what are called exotic quests, which are single player kind of end game, kind of fairly high end hunts for particular pieces of gear. And now some of those mechanics show up in the campaign as well. So things like, I mean, it's usually some variant of um, killing a mini boss to get an orb to put it in a place to take down a shield on a boss to kill that boss, or pattern matching with symbols that appear on different doorways and you've got to figure out which is the odd one out, or just these sorts of like layered or a barrier you can only destroy with a magical sword that you get from killing this guy, and he only spawns over here, and you have to go kill him, and then take it over here. It sounds fairly basic when I describe it like that, but these things add a lot of. They're very true to what playing Destiny at higher levels is like anyway, but also it adds like it makes it more than a like sort of shoot through room, get to next room, shoot through room experience. Like I find myself having to figure out the encounters and then beat them even in a single player experience, which is great. I really, because it's the best thing about the game and its combat sandbox is that thing of like, well, how do I damage this boss if they're immune right now? Okay, I'm going to go figure out what the rules of this new environment are, and then I'll beat it. Um,
Hmm.
which incidentally I really like as a way of building boss fights as well, and it has some really good ones, and there's loads of them as well. Every mission, I think there's like 8 or 9 missions, and every mission has 2 or 3 like boss fight style encounters in it, which are all pretty good. I had a really good time throughout. So, and that I think it's notably better than the last couple of expansions have been in that regard. And yeah, now I've plopped out the other side into the new end game, and very happy with it and very impressed with it. And I think they continue to build out the story in interesting ways as well.
Have they left themselves with space to move into from here?
Yeah, very much. It's
Okay.
they I won't spoil anything. It's moving towards an end game. They've said that already, like that there's basically 2 expansions left after this one.
All right.
Um,
Do you know what they're going to do then?
no, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's a new game or something like that. I doubt they're going to, particularly after the Sony acquisition, I very much doubt that this is going away.
Hmm.
But they have said that the current storyline has an ending. And it feels like we're getting there. It does feel like we're getting there. Like, there's meaningful changes to the status quo, and some meaningful reveals about the whatever the past version of the status quo is. The status and so Destiny remains sort of like basically my favorite game, I think, because of the way all of its elements work together, from the visuals and the world building to just being a very, very good shooter to having very compelling for me at least, sort of thinky PvE combat, basically. And this feels like a good combination of like this. If what it feels like is a creative team that's kind of hit their stride now. The new writing team, the fact that they've done all the tech work they needed to do to give them the freedom to build stuff like this, the fact that they're not having to pull the expansion together as a pandemic shuts the office down, which thwarted the last one somewhat.
Right. Yeah.
You know, it's a very positive sort of, it's very confident like reassertion of the things that are good about that game, which is a big thing for me to say when I'm also saying, but I don't know what someone who is brand new to it would make of it.
Well, that was going to. Yeah, I'm interested to know that. I mean, now that they've pushed through the Space Horse game show Boo Boo,
Yeah.
uh, what what awaits new players? I mean, the Dark Souls thing with a sort of a capped inbuilt level of difficulty sounds very tempting to me. But then I think I was tempted to play it in October of 2019 by similar claims, and it didn't make any fucking sense to me then. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. The new one, they do work hard to. One thing I think is good about the campaign is it has some surprises in it, but it also kind of works hard to be like, to explain things that have happened, and it will sound completely mad. It's very rewarding if you've been there from the start, which is great, obviously, but you know, there's a sort of this happened, then this happened, then this happened, and also to kind of actualize things from the backstory. I have no idea how much weight any of it would carry coming into it. The other thing is, I am not sure. I'd be really interested, but so Pip has been playing it, and she isn't a kind of active Destiny player anymore. She was for a long time. But she hit a bit of a wall with the harder difficulty stuff because it's not necessarily tuned for people who want like, well, I think it could be tuned for people who want a really hard game, but it's also sort of there to answer the problem that used to exist with Destiny campaigns where if you were if you're the kind of player who is grinding out end game stuff the night before the expansion came out, the new campaign would just crumble before you, right? You would breeze through it. And it would, you know, it would be kind of trivially easy because you had all the best stuff in the game. And so that harder difficulty is also partly a practical thing to give a mode that lets big nerds like me chew on something for a bit and actually have their time with it. And so I don't know what it would be like for a new player coming in with a much more limited, like they even say this in the description of the mode. It's like kind of intended for experienced players who benefit from having like a big selection of guns to match to the various problems they face.
I see.
But yeah, like the other side of it is, I think your kind of experience would be the new player loop, the new player sort of intro sequence being introduced to a bunch of the extra stuff, and then being sort of thrown into this new campaign. And I feel like my suspicion is it would still feel like quite a disconnected experience. But if the underlying kind of systems and stuff got their hooks into you, then it's a way to be connected to what's going in the game on in the game right now. Because alongside this, the new season also started, which is interconnected with the story and much better integrated than it previously was. But is its own completely separate raft of new content that sits on the side of that and that will go away next year. So, yeah.
Interesting. How big is it? Can we be bothered to re-download it? That's the question.
It must be.
Let's see.
Let's find out.
It's 80.6 gigabytes, apparently, which is not too
not
bad.
Too bad. No, it's too bad. That's the benefit of removing big chunks of the game every now and then. But yeah, I appreciate I've done my 30-minute Destiny ramble now, which I only get to do every now and then. But yeah, like I feel like this. So obviously, I enjoy it as a fan, and I also think that it's a very it's a creative effort with what was I going to say? Maybe this is too arch. It feels like a very authentic creative effort at the moment. Like it's got a writer's room that really cares, and I think I mean actually I don't really like that phrasing. Having just said it because I don't want to imply that games don't have that, but it feels like the output of a kind of empowered creative team with a bit of a budget able to tell a grand old sort of Shaggy Dog story about a ball, basically, and a horse. And I like that myself personally. It's the kind of thing I'm into.
A bull and the horse that loved him.
Indeed. Or did he?
Oh, I see.
Who does
That's
the
a
horse
twist.
serve? Yeah, exactly. Horses. The horse, I think, bows to no master. There's a lot of good. So if you play Destiny with the subtitles on, whoever wrote the dialogue for that mode had a lot of fun with the horse. Because it has a lot of noises, but it only whinnies. Like, it whinnies like a horse. It makes horse noises. But these horse noises were all made by, I think, D. Bradley Baker. The voice actor does a lot of creature noises. And they're all written in the script as things like Imperial Whinny or non-Euclidean bray or like or like serendipitous wicker. And the actor who did it did his best. Which I think is real art.
That is excellent.
Anyhow, I feel like I could go on, and God knows I probably could, but I shan't. What have you been playing, Marsh?
I've been playing just a demo, actually, for a game called Abris. ABRISS. I don't know if that has a meaning in another language. It's just a word to me. But it's a game about exploding cyber brutalist architecture, basically. It's basically Boom Blocks. Did you ever play Boom Blocks?
Steven Spielberg's Boom Blocks.
Indeed, yeah. What a weird fucking combination of people worked on that. But yeah, that was like a physics puzzler for the Wii, where you had to dismantle these tottering towers of blocks by lobbing like the minimum number of objects at them with your willy waggle sticks.
Mm-hmm.
Reverse Jenga, if you will. And I like it was quite. I thought it was a great game, Boom Blocks. There were loads of kind of interesting complications to that. They really managed to kind of squeeze a lot of actual puzzle variety from what is just quite a crude sort of physics idea, like knocking over certain blocks deducted from your score instead, so you'd have to try and bring everything else down around them apart from those, which is quite a cool challenge. Or there were like explosive blocks that set off chain reactions. It was fucking awesome. And Abris is sort of similar in premise, but like just about as far apart in style as I think these two games could be without one of them being, wildly pornographic or something. And so instead of like having Dayglow Duplo bricks with smiling faces on them as per Boom Blocks, the structures you're trying to bring down are just these horrible, colossal, intricate techno monoliths that are just encrusted with gantries and pipes and strut work and these bold concrete slabs rising out of green mist. It's just it's just awesome to look at. These raw industrial behemoths covered in greebles, just absolutely greebled to the max. No humans, just greebles. And yeah, it's just amazing to look at. These hellish tech future landscapes swarming with drones, and you've just got to fuck up these buildings for no obvious reason, which is cool. And so each level is sort of like you have this structure to take down, and you have a number of construction elements that you can pick from, and a restricted build space on which to build some sort of physics weapon, basically like a crude ballista or just a massive crane arm, just a sort of pinwheel into the thing. You get other kind of fun stuff like jet propulsion and lasers and things. It's actually quite similar to Besiege in
That's
some
what I was
ways,
thinking about.
except Besiege, where you build catapults and ballistas, and that's much more of a vehicle simulation. Whereas here, all the constructions, at least all the constructions I made so far, need to be built up from a static platform. And the positioning of those platforms is part of the puzzle challenge of it. So for example, on one level, you have to take down these three structures that are set up sort of like dominoes. There's in a line behind each other, and there's this huge gulf between your platform and them. So I built up this sort of intentionally unstable tower of columns with a loose girder on the top, to which I'd welded like this sort of super heavy block and a jet engine, so that when I hit play on the level, the entire thing was sort of like topple forward very slowly, and then at the right moment I could activate the jet, and the girder will be launched off to sort of cartwheel into the first domino, where it like hit an explosive core and then blow out through the back of it and into the others, and just looks spectacular. Like the granularity of the destruction is extremely gratifying. And there's not a huge amount in the demo. I wait to see if it reaches like boom blocks or besiege levels of complexity. But if you have 10 minutes and just want to wreck some shit, then absolutely recommend checking it out.
Where is it? Is it on?
It's on the Steam.
Steam. Imagine.
Indeed. I think it might also be on itch as well. But yeah, it's a demo. It's free. You can play it.
I might.
Or we might not. We'll see in a couple of hours.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I had genuinely forgotten. I'm just going to check. When does it unlock? Elden Ring, that is. It says coming February the 24th. That's now.
I think it's in 2 hours for me currently. 2 hours and 9 minutes.
There's Elden Ring currently has absolutely fascinating screenshot choice on its main news page. There's a news item, the most recent news item after the launch live stream event announcement, where the news title is simply "The Shattering tainted these lands with chaos." I'm sure it did. And the news itself is "The Shattering tainted these lands with chaos. Even a traveler who follows the path of grace must be cunning and cautious in equal measure." But the picture accompanying this is just a knight squatting in a bush, sneaking up on a pantless goblin from behind.
It's the writing above it, which is so grandly written, with like a little bit of filigree around it, and it just says crouching. That's a back of the box claim, isn't it?
Yeah, crouching.
Gamers crouching.
And also, I mean, I appreciate we're just this is like maybe not the best use of an audio medium, like two men laugh at a picture on the internet, but the emphasis created by making certain words in the sentence below gold is also tickling me. Crouch to make it harder for enemies to discover you. I feel like I know about crouching now, which is the point.
I believe there's another near irrelevance that we wish to talk about today, right?
Well, we could do, yeah. I mean, or I could keep exploring the Elden Ring store page, which is the most you're going to get into. Because I mean, we got probably like a lock in next week. So this is the most Elden Ring we're going to be able to share. It locks in 2 hours. Okay, well that's fine then. I am very excited. I'll tell you what, let's just stay on this momentarily. What? Because I'm genuinely curious to know, what excites you about Elden Ring?
I've largely ignored all of the news around it, so my excitement is merely the prospect of another game by that studio, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know almost nothing. The one thing I do know is that my graphics card is below the minimum spec, which is depressing. But early reports suggest I should still be able to play it, and it shouldn't matter that much. I don't know. I tell you what, this is an odd thing, just because it's relevant to the game we could talk about, which, spoilers, is Total Warhammer 3. Which looks absolute dog turd for me.
Really?
Yeah, it's awful looking. And I do have, so my graphics card is 6 years old, and I haven't been able to buy one for this, at least not for the sorts of money that's being asked for new graphics cards. And so it's to be expected that new games won't look or run super good. But this tech, I don't know if this is just like my imagination, perhaps you can confirm, but I feel like this tech cycle feels very different from previous ones, in that in the past, I have also in the past been at this sort of like tech pauper level of the tech cycle. And then when you get a new graphics card, you're basically able to play entirely new kinds of games that didn't exist before. Like
Yeah.
that was how things used to work. And you're like, oh, suddenly I can play open world games. You know, the genre that Dark Souls invented. And this generation, though, I feel like the gains are not only quite negligible, but the optimizations for old hardware are so much poorer that I feel like I'd be paying thousands of bucks for a new graphics card just so that Total Warhammer 3 can look as good as Total Warhammer 1 already does on my aging 1050 Ti. Like, I don't know if I'm explaining this well, but I know it's simplistic and naive to expect that a game I play today on my underspec'd graphics card will look as good or as bad as a game I played on the same card when it was cutting edge. But I don't think they should look wildly, wildly worse.
No.
Like, Total Warhammer 3 looks worse than Empire Total War did in 2007.
Oh, wow.
And that's weird because my graphics card is newer than that.
This suggests that something's broken to me, because I've had some weirdness with it. It runs and looks fine to me, but I have found it a little bit unstable. Like, I wonder if it's downscaling something, or is it also running like? Does it look bad, or does it run badly, or both?
It runs okay, but nearly everything is turned off in a way. I'd have to uncheck like memory caps in order to get any features running. Basically, it automatically says, "Oh, for this graphics card, we'll turn lighting off." Basically. So yeah, but yes, I fear this will be also the case with Elden Ring, but a game which doesn't look like, I mean, it looks pretty, but it doesn't. A lot of that seems to be art choice rather than graphics whomp.
There's only so much whomp you can put in a bog.
Indeed.
And all games are set in bogs now. It's been decreed. It's February 2022. Age of the bog game. Pretty much.
I'm happy to stay there.
Yeah, I thought you would be. Yeah, so I mean, I was just on that point. Like, I think I agree. Like, I got my fancy new PC almost a year ago, actually, but it's still, not daunted by anything that's coming out, which I'm grateful for. Having, basically paid through the nose to extract a good graphics card from the the jaws of bot buyers and so on. But the only game VR performance has been meaningful, but that's about those games don't look incredible. It's just they don't make me vomit now. The other side, the only game I can think of that was really a showcase for what it meant to have a more powerful machine in the way that it used to be was Cyberpunk. Like, and that's
right,
almost like the other side of its own issues, right? That like being able to play that game without very many issues, with everything cranked up to max, was a treat, but also an expensive treat in this particular case. I haven't downloaded the 50 gig patch that game has received yet, but I might. We can talk about Warhammer momentarily, but I was completely having finished Cyberpunk before Christmas. I was completely comfortable with not necessarily coming back for this update because I like the game. I've said my piece about it in that regard. Because what it the obviously the quality of life pass doesn't mean a huge amount to me, having finished the game, and then a lot of the kind of like the features, like they've rebalanced all of the skills and abilities. That's kind of interesting. It's also kind of not why I played the game. They've added the ability to buy apartments. I could probably load a save and look at them and have the full experience of that without really needing to reinvest much time in it. They've had the ability to give yourself buffs by having a shower in your apartment. Joke's on you, CD Projekt Red. I was already having a shower for roleplay reasons. And pretending it helped. So the fact that they're backing me up with like a 20% buff to health regen kickstart time or something, fine. But then they said that they've added like several more text messages that your loved ones can send you. So now I have to replay the entire game, but I won't. But yeah, so I think we both played Total Warhammer 3, haven't we?
We did, yes. I played about 3 hours of the campaign that it comes with.
The kind of new player tutorial campaign thingy.
Yes.
Yeah, I have played that and about the first 80 turns of the new Demon Prince campaign. So I can speak to that. I'm very curious to
Mm.
see how you have found it. I can speak to my own Warhammer perspectives, but yeah.
Well, I don't entirely know what to make of it yet. I played. I have a slightly kind of on-off relationship with the Total War series in that I played a lot of the early Total Wars, medieval and Rome, um, and at the time they were just such technically impressive feats to be able to field and control that many individual units in 3D. That alone was the reason to play those games. As strategy games, I'm a bit more leery of them. I don't know that I've ever really jibed with what those games want from me as a commander in order
Mm.
to like effectively manipulate the sway of battle. I don't feel they don't feel like the sorts of micro heavy RTS games like StarCraft that I normally avoid. But they also I don't. They seem to fall between two stools. I don't really understand it. But like periodically, as I've dipped back into the series, and it's obviously expanded in scope, and there's all this higher level strategy, conquest stuff now, and diplomacy and so forth. But the sort of like the meat and potatoes of it is still these battles, which once they get kind of more graphically complex, still kind of feel like just clusterfucks to me every single time. And I remember excitedly trying out Empire Total War in preview, having just come out of like a chat with the developers where they'd really enthusiastically described how they modeled the loss of cannonball velocity based on the quality of the mud it bounces off. And I was so psyched because I was like, yes, I love simulated mud. And then and then like I tried to maneuver a column of horses through a gate, and they just all plow into each other, and five of the horses just like spinning on the spot, and then some of the horses path around the wall and then come back in from the other side for some reason, and it's just like, yeah, no, and I don't mind that
Mm.
it's hard to control because like war is hard to control, Chris.
You tried to get a horse to go through a wide door.
I just, I'm playing this one. I actually quit out because I just wanted some troops to go up a hill and down the other side and engage an enemy unit. But because the enemy unit moved like 20 meters to the right, my units decided to just plow into a copse of trees and then into each other, and then they just stopped. And like, I'm sure I could have microed my way out of that situation, but like, it feels to me like the game should either do a better job of interpreting vague commands that you give, or it could give you more articulate commands to issue, and it doesn't seem to do either. But
Yeah.
one other thing. I mean, I have been kind of enjoying it, but like just one other thing that differentiates this from the Total Wars, which I'm more familiar with, which are based in some form of reality, is that I don't have any instinctive idea for how a bunch of Kossars are going to fare against like psychic chicken men. But I imagine you, as a Warhammer man, do.
I guess, but here's the thing: like, I've been playing it a fair bit, and I do like all of these games. I have played and finished all of the Total Warhammer main campaigns, and then after that, had like a bunch of the classic kind of first 50 to 100 turns before wandering off and trying something else. Um, but I do agree with you that like there's something about the battle game that always feels sort of like not quite there for me. But also crucially, what I would say is, I think it's a really evocative, and we can speak to some of the very evocative and now very full featured kind of evocation of old Warhammer Fantasy Battle now. But crucially, I think the battles don't feel like Warhammer, um, and they don't bear a huge resemblance to the flow of a tabletop game. And I don't think that's the goal, honestly. Obviously, it's a bit apples and oranges because you're comparing a turn-based miniatures game to a real-time strategy game. But my ability to gauge one thing I have a lot of fun. So a lot of my favorite stuff in Warhammer tradition has always been the chaos stuff. This is the game that really finally kind of like breaks open the huge bag of weirdos and spills them all over the board. In terms of the various demons of chaos are far better represented here than they have been previously. Um, and I have a sort of a sense of what they each do based on my understanding of the setting from the tabletop game, but it doesn't map like quite all that. In fact, actually, some of my favorite moments playing it so far have been moments where it has briefly kind of felt like, oh, that would work in regular Warhammer. But particularly when it comes to things like what the spells do, what the heroes do, it feels very sort of very, very different. And I think, mostly the broad things are roughly the same. Slaanesh stuff is fast. Nurgle stuff is tough. Tzeentch stuff is weird. Khorne stuff is choppy, hits you with something. But there's and so you can sort of line things up in roughly that way. But broadly, like that sort of knowledge of the setting isn't the thing that kind of is getting me through battles. What's getting me through battles is, and this is the thing that makes me most uncomfortable about Total War, is awareness of basically how to play the game to force the enemy to quit effectively. There's a concept in tabletop wargaming called a negative player experience, or an NPE, and it's a subject of much very boring debate basically about if you play very competitively and therefore you make the game less fun for your opponent, is that cool? And this exists in most competitive tabletop contexts, to be honest, but is that an edgy big boy using every tool at their disposal to win the day? Or is it being a dickhead? And I feel like the one thing that I would say for its connection to the tabletop game is the optimal way to play Total War against the AI is to create a miserable experience for them that doesn't always 100% follow the logic of the flow of a battle, but absolutely revolves around exploiting pathing weirdnesses and stuff. And I find myself now, having played a lot of these games, sort of instinctively doing it, and I have a fairly good time doing it. But I found, particularly as the Warhammer games have become less kind of attached to reality. Well, actually, I have a mixed relationship with this. The fact that they're less and less attached to reality, particularly now that I'm playing a campaign about demons, means that I feel like it's almost less immersion breaking for me to command my troops to do something really fucking strange. While at the same time feeling increasingly slightly detached from the kind of consequences of my actions. So the example I will give you, in my campaign, a Kislevite army, sort of servant of the Ice Queen, was roaming in my territory in a way that I had to deal with it, but I didn't want to deal with it with my main army. So I sent a slightly understrength host of Slaaneshi demons to deal with it. And the battle took place across a huge frozen lake with an island in the middle. And I am the aggressor in this particular battle. So it's on me to attack. If I don't engage, then I can't. Then I will lose on time, basically. But also, I'm slightly outnumbered, and I don't want this to be the case. So I line up all of my melee stuff on the far shore, basically with their backs directly to the edge of the board, as far away from the enemy army as possible. And I have some special abilities that allow me to Vanguard deploy basically anything I want. So I Vanguard deploy a bunch of Furies, these little flappy bird demons, on one flank, and some Seekers, which is sort of demonettes riding wibble-tongued snoot beasts, on the other flank. Incidentally, that's something I find very compelling about seeing Warhammer brought to life, particularly the kind of weirder units. But in my mind's eye, those Seekers on their wibbly bipedal snoot beasts have always gone as they've run along, because it looks like that's what they're doing. And they don't do that in the game. So that's a shame. But then what I did was start the battle, keep all of my people at the back line, run both of my flanking units forward, and then around the front of both sides of the enemy army, and then back again. And what this caused is those flanks to charge, and then just kind of keep going. And it's the old, in some ways, it's just the Battle of Hastings play always works in Total War, where it's like, chase me. And then they're like, oh, I guess we're fucking going. And occasionally the enemy will like stop and think about it for a minute, but it feels like you've tipped them over some threshold into, I guess we're charging. And so that meant a lot of sweaty Kislevites running all the way across this big frozen lake, getting knackered by the time they got to me, but also breaking up their formation enough to allow me to like pull the odd unit aside using AI stuff. And then crucially, their leader, their general in this case, was a wizard on foot. And she was running around behind the army. And so I just waited until like a critical distance existed between her and the rest of the army, charged my army forward to lock the rest of her army in place, and brought those same flanking units in from both sides to enclose the wizard, at which point she's locked in a kind of death fight. She can't really win. She'll kill a bunch of them. And then it becomes a big grind fest. And there's not a lot for me to do at that point, except to watch for units that have inexplicably disengaged from combat and are just standing there or whatever, that kind of weird stuff. Literally looking for the ZZZ's snooze icon on each of the tab things just to make sure that people get redirected. But otherwise, at that point, I can kind of put the battle in fast forward and just wait for it to resolve, because I've kind of orchestrated a bit of a trap. And there's fun in that. There is. But I find myself not feeling like I have to respond to changing circumstances in ways that feel like I'm directing the ebb and flow of a real battle. It feels like I'm playing a game, frankly, against the computer, where I'll probably win. Now, I'm playing on normal mode for this, and I think it is fair, like, because I could feel the counter argument coming that, like, well, you up the difficulty if you're finding it too easy. But for me, if the fantasy isn't kind of being closely aligned with like successful play on your normal difficulty, then I think it does speak to a different issue, right? Like an issue with sort of what the game rewards, no matter what it simulates, what kind of behaviors actually result in success.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I find myself auto-resolving battles more often than I'd expect.
Because I mean, it's quite an exhausting sequence of battles that at least the tutorial puts you through.
Yeah.
I feel like the strategy game, at least in the tutorial, isn't growing quite as quickly as it should, in order to sort of give you something more substantial to do in between those battles. I do wonder if I kind of think I'd like a game like Total War, which essentially strips you of nearly all control during the RTS moment of it, and instead you spend a lot of time sort of planning the battle abstractly and providing sort of like if then else logic to your commanders. And then when it comes to the actual battle itself, all you can get to do is like honk a horn, and 2 honks means something, 3 honks means something else.
Yeah, basically Football Manager.
Is that what it is? Okay.
Basically Football Manager, yeah. Just like, here's the game plan. And yeah, I kind of agree. Like, I think it's interesting because I do like, I'm enjoying the game. I enjoy all of these games, and I'll get to some of the reasons why. But I'll have one more moan before we move on to some of those qualities. One is, but it's basically that I think, so the Warhammer stuff gives them an opportunity to bring in heroes and monsters and kind of different kind of paradigms of power. And I think they did these quite well in Three Kingdoms as well, actually. But I do find that they're missing something in terms of a sense of impact, because really, like, the heart of Total War is not like, StarCraft style micro, where your units are doing imminent, kind of very lethal damage to individual enemy pieces. It's more about setting up scenarios where you will win fights eventually, kind of like, and then setting those fights going, almost like setting a whole bunch of different kind of plates spinning across the battlefield, and just needing to check in on them to make sure they're still spinning in the way that you want. And I think Heroes interface with this sort of slightly awkwardly still to me, because they add this extra layer of micro in terms of the use of spells and other abilities. And there's some finesse you can do with that. But I think because the game is so much about kind of like real-time attritional warfare, there's a reluctance to have the presence of those characters really heavily swing an encounter, or kind of end an encounter quickly, which in some ways I would prefer. Like the kind of the feeling, and because it really is a feel thing. Like, I would rather have abilities on longer cooldowns that were basically just like smart bombs. It's like, my Demon Prince has swept in and used his big axe sweep, and that unit of footmen are basically fucked, and I can just move on to the next thing. So I'm making another decision straight away. What happens is I send him in and I use the swing ability, and it goes bong, and then he goes, huh? And then I see like a red bar move like 8 pixels, and some men fall over. And 30 seconds from now, that unit might rout. But it doesn't have quite that feedback loop of sort of like, okay, I've used my special ability here, time to kind of rethink how I want to use him in the meantime. Um, and I think, yeah, there's a sort of, yeah, an awkward middle ground. I mean, this is the thing. Like this, I have gone back and forth with some of these because, as I say, it's a series I played a lot. I find that the spectacle of it and the sense of, you know, um, the sense of mastery it can make you feel when you really do orchestrate a cool trap for people, or kind of, you know, survive against the odds. Particularly, I think winning against the odds is the best feeling in Total War, because it makes that kind of, you know, use of the mechanics to kind of eke out a victory feel sort of virtuous rather than just like you're bullying a computer.
Right.
Um, um, I do find it compelling. Like I feel like we kind of, I laid into it quite hard, kind of off the bat, but like I think that's partly because I like the setting enough and I like the flow of it enough, and I find it very kind of Moorish. But I can never quite shake the feeling that the underlying sort of battle system is quite superficial, and I wonder what the game would be like if it was tighter, basically.
Mm.
Either, as you say, more about kind of spectating, more about that kind of setup thing, or um, you know, more about kind of complex in the moment decision making. However, I think for it to go in that direction, it would make more sense as a turn based game.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It does have the pause thing. I mean,
True.
I think that that would give you ample space to issue a string of commands and see them executed over time. But yeah, that's I yes, as kind of critical of it as I am. I mean, I think the thing that is was winsome about medieval and Rome, and is still winsome about Total Warhammer, is just that it's such a kind of incredibly excessive evocation of that fantasy.
Mm.
In a way, it doesn't really need to pretend to be a decent strategy game when it's just, you know, it's fielding that many units and they're all hitting each other at the same time. That's that's just exciting. Although, you know, you don't. I mean, I don't find myself, except in the kind of attritional end game of a battle, I don't often find myself being able to really look at units, which is weird because that is probably the primary pleasure that I would take in actual Warhammer. You know,
Mm.
those
Yeah.
those being able to manipulate and admire the actual individual models themselves and enjoy the fantasy of them is what part, you know, like 90% of what makes that so exciting.
Mm.
Whereas yeah, they're just very small for most of the time in this.
Yeah, yeah. I think the spectacle of it can be great. I like a lot of the new environments. I think its evocation of the realm of chaos is really fun because you're fighting some mad places now,
Mm.
particularly in the main campaign. And yeah, like because I think it's interesting because I think the battle game has become more and more about um, a big kind of toy box full of pieces that do things and are fun and interesting and strategic, but also about that spectacle and about the kind of effectively the fun of just smashing your overpowered army into an enemy and coming out on top. The campaign game feels more like a board game than it ever has to me. Um, I always think that Total War campaigns have more board game to them than sim in some ways.
Mm.
Um, but particularly now. But actually, I think that is to its credit, and I think it works pretty well. You haven't kind of graduated to the new kind of main campaign stuff, have you?
No, I haven't. I'm intrigued by it because it seems like they've addressed a lot of the issues that people had in the campaign level
Mm.
game of the previous one.
Yeah, I think it's really good. And I think the strength of the Warhammer setting is that the factions are so different to each other now, right? So even me talking about my experiences with the Demon Prince campaign, it's going to be very different to the experience that you might have playing one of the other new factions or going back and playing one of the old factions or whatever. I don't think you can do that yet in 3, but you presumably will be able to eventually. Um, yeah, I'm really enjoying it. The basic conceit now is that something bad has happened to a faraway big bear, and you must save him or murder him. And in order to do this, you need to unlock a particular part of the realm of chaos. In order to do that, you have to kind of every so often, every certain number of turns, um, the bear will roar, shaking the balls of reality, and portals will open across the map. And when you interact with one of these portals, you can either go through it or you can, well, you can do one of three things. You can go through it to the realm of chaos, you can go through it to somewhere else in the world, or you can close it, which you might do for strategic reasons. If you go through it to the realm of chaos, then you go to one of the 4 domains of the chaos gods, so Tzeentch, Nurgle, Slaanesh, or Khorne. And once there, you've got to kind of like complete a challenge to give yourself racing against the other factions, complete a challenge to have a chance to fight that god's particular army, and in doing so, claim a demon prince's soul from that particular faction. And the first faction on the map to get all 4 demons' souls, oh god, we went there again, wins, basically, or wins a shot at finishing the game, which feels very board. That's what feels very board gamey to me, like that sort of, and being able to see how your rivals are doing, being able to see their progress while you're in the realm of chaos as well. And while you're in the realm of chaos, there's very little sort of recuperating your army. So you've kind of got to you've got to kind of time it so that you've got a good army ready to go when the portals open, get in there and get moving quickly. And so it kind of rewards good, kind of well-managed sort of forward-thinking campaign play, but in a way that isn't just get bigger and fatter until you can launch yourself at the end game and brute force it, because you have to wait for that opportunity to win, which is a really cool way of structuring it. I think it works really, really well.
I like that.
And otherwise, like, it just feels like a lot of sort of there's a lot of fun kind of strategic stuff you can do around kind of like forcing portals closed for your opponents, with agents sneaking into their territory and closing all their portals so they can't do anything about it, or or the need to kind of have a home defense army while your main army is away, and all of those things that kind of create interesting wrinkles. I don't think I've had any kind of like really stand out great campaign experiences so far, but the Demon Prince campaign is really unusual in that it lets you mix and match all of the Chaos Demon factions. And in doing so, kind of slowly build your demon towards his allegiance to either one of the Chaos Gods or none of them. And I'm going for none of them because I am a special boy and I want him to be a special boy too. But
so hang on, is Chaos Reborn, is that mix and match? Is that what that faction is now?
It's called, it's the Chaos Undivided is the typical
I'm
phrase.
Sorry, yeah.
Is the phrase for like, chaos just sort of in all 4 gods in tension with each other, basically. But your Demon Prince is really highly customizable. Like, it's the first kind of fully customizable character, I think, in a Total War game, where you can equip new heads and wings and horns and arms and legs and stuff as they shift from one god to the other, getting different blessings.
Can you add a Wibble Snoot?
I haven't unlocked it, but you better believe it's getting bolted right on there. But I was going for like Undivided, and one of the early things you can get on the Undivided kind of skill track is like the respect of the northern clans, because it's the Norskins of the realm of chaos, like the kind of chaos marauders. And I very early on just dumped 3 skill points into this thing that's basically just Vikings think you're cool. And because of this, it created this sort of diplomacy cascade, which is a kind of weird thing to happen to a Demon Prince of Chaos, but where every single turn, another warlord of the Bjornlings or the Scalings or the others would come to me and slowly escalate their friendship of me, because I'd sort of triggered some kind of endlessly escalating respect cycle. And so now I'm best friends with every Viking everywhere, and over time I could just I've steadily become so impressive to them that without sort of having to deal a single blow, I'm just sort of bolting them to the sides of my empire as vassal states now, which is a very fun outcome. It's not what I expected from a demon campaign, really, that like you're the biggest, coolest Viking, and therefore everyone wants to be your best mate. That was very enjoyable.
Am I right in thinking that you could use outposts to essentially add unit types of completely different factions to your army?
Yeah, if they are your ally, you can do that.
Right, yes, that was like a bullet point, but I didn't quite understand how that works when I read it.
You become allies, and then those units, you're limited in the amount you can have, and they also don't, rather than costing regular resources, they cost literally something like ally points, which you get by doing things for that ally, right? So if that ally, you can check, and that ally might have a mission for you, like kill this particular army, and then you do that, and you get some points that you can spend on units from that, a limited selection of units from that faction, which is why my first expedition to the Realm of Chaos was an army comprised of like a couple of hundred bloodletters of Khorne, some pink horrors of Tzeentch, a bunch of Slaneshi cavalry, and one unit of about 30 regular men who died. I don't know why I brought them.
The bloodletters are the sort of like typical demon-looking dudes, right, with big swords.
Wee little Diablos.
Wee little Diablos. You see, I thought they were meant to be hardcore murder beasts, but then one of the first mission in the tutorial campaign has you just kind of launch some peasants with sticks at them, and you absolutely muller them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be that guy, but that probably shouldn't work. They are supposed to be like, head-taking demons from the hell dimension. So, yeah, I think it's because they haven't really ever. They don't really. Demons are a tricky thing to get right in Warhammer, I think, at the best of times. And the tabletop game can struggle with this a little bit as well. I think the thing that surprises me, but maybe it's just evidence of the way that they don't really kind of think about. Well, their goal is to create a total war game, not a Warhammer game. Is that like there isn't very much to do with summoning, which is surprising to me because that's like the biggest association with demons in the setting, right? Like the notion of a bloodletter is that if there's a battle that is, grueling, horrible battle between mortals, then demons might rise up from the spilled blood and, pick up the swords of the fallen and continue fighting, right? Like, because they are expressions of the kind of animus or the animosity that was previously there. In this, they're just little red men, and you buy them from a big house. The same as anyone else. There's some very kind of quite edgy writing for the Demon Prince as well. I have found, like the tabletop game, particularly Age of Sigmar, as the setting is developed, is kind of, I think, maybe steered a little bit further away from, like, for example, pointedly the the equivalence of sex with depravity with Slanesh, right, and moved Slanesh towards excess in general, a sense about excessive pride or gluttony, like those sorts of things. Whereas this, they're just little sex monsters. There's an event that occasionally happens because you can kind of suddenly gain the favor of the gods in different things. There's an event that heavily suggests that you spend one night sleeping with every single demon in your army, which I just wasn't expecting from Total War, to be honest. It's nothing it's nothing like more gross or untoward about the way that's written beyond that, because it's something like, the fervor of Slanesh settles upon your forces, and you do not rest until every demon has enjoyed your embrace. And I'm like, I'm a busy guy. I've got like 800 bloodletters. Unless it's like, like when people are like running down into like a sports arena, like high-fiving everyone on the way. Unless it's that. I don't know. I know a broader point to make there, and I feel like I've dug a hole for myself. But it did strike. I took a screenshot of it. It was strikingly weird. Also, one final thing, the game did create. It has some spectacular auto-generated names now. I don't know what they did. But I think they took their random kind of Holy Roman Empire man with a mustache generator and just inserted a lot of bollocks into it. It's definitely been given a shot of something to kind of make it go a little wonkier than it used to. My favorite so far was the commander of I think a Nordlander army roaming my territory, whose name was Raygild Dog Burglar.
That's excellent.
Delight. Genuine delight. Dead now at my hands, the dog burglar. He's burgled his last dog.
I would commit to playing it more, but realistically, it's not going to happen, is it?
Yeah. Have we talked enough that Elden Ring is out?
Not quite.
I'm checking again. Unlocks in a properly in a proper in a pro- approximately 1 hour. I'm so excited I can no longer pronounce words. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I wonder what George R. R. Martin did on Elden Ring.
Yes, that's a good question. I have my suspicions that it may not have been terribly much, but
I don't know. Don't count him out. There'll be a moment in it where some like bread and meat drippings like get on your
yes,
shirt or something. And you'll
yeah.
be like,
You,
there
you
it
end up,
is.
your mount turns into just a giant capon at some point.
Good. Do you have any other Warhammer thoughts? Because I don't.
No, not really. I'd be intrigued to see where it goes, but it's probably not going to happen for me this side of Elden Ring.
I think I'm going to try and finish my campaign alongside getting started with Elden Ring, and that is folly. But I am really enjoying it. Like, I want to see that campaign through. I suspect I'm on the same course I have been on with most of the games in this series, right? Where it's like, I'll get my first campaign done with the faction I like the most, and then I will try a bunch of the other stuff, and then I will try it again when Mortal Empires happens or whatever, and they add the rest of the factions.
Yeah.
And that will be, I'll very happily get my kind of investment's worth out of it. I do. One thing I will say, for me at least, I appreciate that people have had a lot of performance issues. For me, the campaign map stuff runs so much faster than it used to.
All
Like
right.
the turn switch over stuff is they finally made that like not instant, but like fast and configurable to make it fast, which I really appreciate. Because like I imagine one of my awarenesses with Total War is I know there are people who play it on harder difficulties and are good at it and have a more sort of engaged experience of its systems than I do. And I think for those people, watching like a random Skaven priest walk 6 inches on the other side of the world is like vital strategic information. I have never cared. And I spend the entire time aware that the game thinks I care and I don't, you know? Like I will never know what to do with that information. It's like, yeah, he's there now, isn't he? Yeah.
Are you interested at all in the multiplayer?
I've never really played it. I think I tried a bit of Total War multiplayer previously. Um, and I've never played campaign multiplayer. I guess I would be. I don't know. It feels like committing to a big board game, right? That's kind of what it feels
Mm.
like to me.
Yeah, I don't really have a sense of how involved it is, like how committed you are over time.
I suspect, like, one thing, because I've never really played very many grand strategy games competitively like that, but my maybe this is like too much of an ass pull of a take, but my suspicion is that it doesn't feel like a sandbox that's necessarily going to create like um crazy multiplayer stories, right? Like I always have the feeling that the kind of cause and effect chains of player actions are quite um they're quite limited in how far they go beyond where they first have impact, right? You take action against a particular faction, you defeat a particular army, you assassinate a particular character, those things have meaning. But unlike, say, like a Crusader Kings or something like that, it feels like it's unlikely that some kind of great, you know, like mousetrap style series of catastrophes could unfold that really change the status quo.
Mm.
I don't know how like that could be completely wrong, and I'd be really interested if anyone had like a story from a previous Total War game where that kind of like domino effect kind of thing was possible. But for me, that's the appeal of like I don't know multiplayer geopolitics games, right?
Yeah.
Like the kind of the fact that you're all pushing and pulling and tugging at the same web of dynamics and power systems, whereas Total War for me seems to come down to a bit more like a resource race or a like a board game, more like an engine building game in some ways. Like, to what extent can you build a little machine capable of spitting out high level sustainable armies faster than your opponents can?
Mm.
Which and I'm not discounting that. I think it has interest, but I suspect to get me to commit to a long multiplayer session, I would want to feel that like the story of that campaign was going to be interesting rather than the story being my cities were very well conceived and I won.
I wonder what. Yes, I mean, I'd be interested to know even how the actual real-time battles play out with another human, because obviously you can't use any of the bad player experience inducing cheeses that you might in to actually stomp the AI. Maybe it becomes more of a stalemate.
Did someone once add, or did they once add, like voice control to Total War?
Well, that's a question I do
That
not know the answer to.
this is maybe completely wrong, but I think someone once did that, and that would feel like a fun way to control it in multiplayer. I would play that. You'd have to scream.
Not into the trees, you fucking.
Stand in a line, but like about 14 degrees rotated right from where you're standing. Yeah, no, back a bit. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, okay, stay there. All right, now go. That's that would be me in battle in the wilds of the old world.
Should we call it?
Yeah, probably going to go play Destiny for an hour if I'm honest.
That's all the time we have for this podcast. If you'd like to send us a question or even an anecdote about playing Total Warhammer online with other real human beings, you can send that to us at questions@crateandcrowbar.com, or you could tweet us at crateandcrowbar. You can watch these recordings uploaded as videos to YouTube, where you can find other nonsense by us. The address for that is youtube.com/crateandcrowbar. Thanks as always to our backers on Patreon. You can back us too at patreon.com/crateandcrowbar, or you can simply join our wonderful Discord community, link for which is on our website, crateandcrowbar.com. That's it. I've been Marsh Davis.
And I've been Chris Thurston.
Thanks for listening.
Everybody. Chase me. That's jizz.